Oh, there he is. Oh, there's Mr. Hatcher. Hi, Jeff. Can you hear us?
Yes, hello. Yes, hello.
Hello. We can hear you.
Good.
Excellent. We're just a couple minutes early, so do you mind we'll just give it another couple minutes to see who else might be joining us, and then we'll jump in. Are you at your home, or
All
are
right.
you are?
No, I'm in Hartford right now. We're doing that production of Rope in the fall, so we're doing a little bit of early work now.
Oh, great. So you're workshopping it with the actors and the director?
Yeah, this is actually this couple of days here doing some things with funders and the board, and then the workshop for real takes place in New York next week.
Okay. Another Hitchcock on that you seem to be gravitating towards, from Dial M to Rope.
Yes, yeah, a friend of mine told me that Rope went into the public domain this year, I think on January 2nd, and I started typing it either late that night or early January 3rd.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's something we can get into in our talk about the with adaptation. What's when you would try to adapt something public domain or need to go through the estate of an author.
Right, you have to deal with, well, it also depends on what country you're in. You know, certain things they go into the public domain maybe here in the UK, but not vice versa. So it can be complicated.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a moment and we can jump in just a second. Can you see me
Okay.
still here at this
Yes.
screen? Great.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Use the this because I am not good at projecting. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca. I'm the Adult Program and Outreach Librarian here at Peterborough Town Library. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight for the Art of Adaptation with Jeffrey Hatcher and Peterborough Players. I'm so excited to welcome Brendan Fox, the Artistic Director at the Players, who will be leading the discussion tonight. I want to thank Brendan, Jeffrey, Christy, and every one of the players for bringing this program to the library and being such a special part of Peterborough. We're really thrilled to collaborate with them on this event and hopefully do more in the future. So with that, I will pass it over to Brendan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that we're getting to collaborate in this way. And thank you for hosting something like this. This is really thrilling. And thank you, Jeffrey, for your time in the thick of working. I've already been telling our audiences, I think you're one of the hardest working men in show business right now, and I appreciate that you carved out a little time for us. I thought I would just give everyone a quick little pencil sketch of some of the highlights of your career so far, and then we can jump right into the adaptation of Dial M, as well as I'd love to open it up for some questions and thoughts from the audience, and maybe talk a little bit about what you're currently working on, Rope, and maybe some other things. Does that sound good to you? So Jeffrey Hatcher his work has been seen Broadway,
Yes,
off-Broadway. Oh, yes. A little delay there. Broadway, off-Broadway, regionally in the US and abroad. And in 2023, American Theater Magazine has noted that he tied for 5th most produced playwright in America. At that point, he had 13 plays in production. And his 2022 play Dial In for Murder in 2023 was the fifth most produced play that year, with 9 productions. Among some of his other plays, he adapted Robert Louis Stevenson's novella, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And in that version, Mr. Hyde is played by 4 actors, one of whom is female. That was nominated by the Mystery Writers of America for the Edgar Award for Best Play. Some of his other plays have included 3 Viewings, Scotland Road, A Picasso, Mercy of a Storm, Work Song, 3 Views of Frank Lloyd Wright, that I got to know. I worked for a company called LA Theater Works that does radio plays for NPR, and you can find them on iTunes. And Jeff and Eric Simonson created this incredible 3-act play looking at Frank Lloyd Wright in different points of his life. And it was one of the most astonishing plays I'd ever been a part of. Jeff has also worked in film and television, and a couple of his films include Casanova and The Good Liar, which is with Ian McKellen and Helen Mirren, those 2 slackers. I'm sure we've never heard of them. And right as we were just talking about before we officially began, Mr. Hatcher is currently working on adapting Rope, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, was that originally a play and then Hitchcock made it into a film, or was it originally a film?
It was originally a play in the mid-1920s, and then Hitchcock adapted it in 1948.
Okay. And will this be the first stage adaptation again since the original, as far as you know?
Yes, it went into the public domain this year, so we're getting it up in October, which is pretty fast. 9 months from, first typing to opening night is lightning fast.
Yes. Almost as fast as doing a play in 2 weeks, to take an example of Peterborough. Well, I'd love to just ask, before we jump into Dial M, can you share a little bit about how you first got into playwriting and even before adapting? What drew you to writing for the stage?
Well, like a lot of playwrights, I started out as an actor. I think most people start out as actors in the profession. It's the entrance point, because that's where the fun and the glamour is. And then one by one, we all peel off into one thing or another. I think there must be a category of people who, have always wanted to be writers or directors, what have you. But a lot of playwrights used to be actors, and I was one of them. And I was the kind of actor that if I were in Dial In for Murder, I'd be the inspector. The dry British fake English kind of thing. So. But I segued pretty quickly out of that kind of thing into writing in my 20s.
I wonder if you, with your background as an actor, it seems like getting to know a number of your works and seeing them produced, you write great dialogue. And something I've heard from many actors who have had a chance to be in your shows, that your dialogue flows easily. It's fun to work on. It's juicy. Do you think that calls back to your original start as an actor?
Oh, very much so. I think some things get into your blood by osmosis. You learn them without actually even trying to. But at the same time, I think it makes you very aware of what it's like to be on stage without anything interesting to say. A lot of actors, especially ones who work in television and film, they know what it's like to have to say things like, "Inspector, quick, in here, there's a body." Or "We can't get any power, we've got to go to Mach 7. And they're not terribly interesting things to say, but they're necessary to keep the wheels going. But on stage, I think everybody wants something. So, a bit of poetry, a funny line, something dramatic, something shocking. So I'm always aware of the democratic instinct and trying to make sure everybody gets a chance to shine in the show.
I've noticed that the character of Lescott in Dial M, in your adaptation, has a couple of scenes, but he's very memorable. And I think that I've noticed that in all of your plays that I've seen, that everyone gets some juicy lines, great moments, and it does feel like you want to make sure everyone has something to say and something to do, and which I think brings me to your adaptation of Dial M. One of the things that was exciting for me to think about us producing it at Peterborough Players was a number of the alterations you made to the original script, one of which was the way you telescoped the number of characters, among other changes that we can talk about. But first, what drew you to adapt Dial M in the first place? Were you a fan of the film? Has it always been on your radar to take a crack at it, or how did that evolve?
Well, I've always been a fan of the film and the play, and it wasn't on my radar though. Barry Edelstein out of the Old Globe called me up one day out of the blue and asked me if I wanted to adapt it. And I think of Dial M and Frederick Knott's work as being pretty perfect in terms of the plotting and the watchwork mechanics of it all. And Barry said, "Yeah, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and the first rule of adaptation is do no harm, don't screw it up." But he said, I bet we can find a few more twists and turns. It'd be fun to do something different with the character of Max, whom we turned into Maxine, and try to find a little bit more, this is kind of a shop-worn word at this point, but more agency for the role of Margot, what I guess we'd call the Grace Kelly role, who in the original is more acted upon than acting. To try to give her more to do, frankly. Give her a bit more feistiness to her. So, in that sense, Dial M found me. But I'm sure Barry asked me because I'd already done another Frederick Knott. I'd done Wait Until Dark for the Geffen a couple of years before. So, that kind of put me on that kind of radar at the very least.
And so did you and Barry work together on what the goals were of the adaptation, or at a certain point did he just say, the sky's the limit, whatever you want to do with this take on the original is up to you?
It was pretty much as I've just described. Barry said, "Yeah, can we get it from a 3-act into a 2-act because it was in that 3-act form from back then." But most important were my mission was to do things with Margot that hadn't been done before, to see if switching Max from Maxine worked to begin with, and to see if there was more gold to be mined there, and again to see if there were a couple twists and turns that weren't there in the first in Knott's original, that didn't upend the plot of the new one. And I did a draft, and we were all set to do it in 2020, and then of course COVID came in. So Barry's assignment was specific to those 3 things, but it wasn't microscopic. And with the Max to Maxine switch, it suddenly made a lot of things light up very, very quickly. It was fairly easy to do in terms of plot, but also it just made everything much more fraught. I mean, in the original, Margot and Max are having an affair, and of course she doesn't want anybody to know about it, but that's a heterosexual affair. And in 1953-54, to have been having a lesbian affair, that's earth-shattering. That's you're thrown out of the club. You're damned everywhere you go. So it suddenly made things pop for me, at least, and I hope for the audiences in ways that we hadn't imagined when we started out.
Yes, I saw how it raised the stakes. Like you said, everything popped as a result, and for both Margot and Maxine, and for Tony's malice and why he wanted to do what he wanted to do and fold in Lescott, it raised his stakes in terms of the shock he felt. Not only was my wife cheating on me, but cheating on me with a woman at that time and place was very clear how much he hated that.
Yes, it's emasculating. And also, Tony in the original is a former tennis player. And that's because Knott was a big tennis player himself. But tennis has nothing to do with the plot. So I thought if we made Tony a failed author of quote unquote serious work, whereas Maxine is now become a successful author of pulp work. It would drive him absolutely bats. So there are lots of reasons for Tony to be completely malicious in his homicidal intent.
So, so both on an intimacy personal level and also on a professional level. I hadn't thought of that.
Oh yeah, yeah. Tony is a sociopath, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't feel. It's just that he only feels about himself.
Mm. I have a quick question for our audience. How many here have already seen our production? Okay, so who has not seen it yet? Okay, so we've got a couple. So we will be mindful of spoilers. Well, I know, but we have a couple people that for the gentleman here, we want to make sure we don't divulge too much. But I think there's plenty to still talk about in terms of this switch of Maxine as to a woman and also as a mystery writer. I'm curious, Jeff, have you had many characters who are writers in your plays before, and how meta is that for you?
Oh, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about that. I've done it a couple of times. It's a lot of fun to do because the meta does engage rather quickly. And by the way, for the sake of the gentleman who hasn't seen the show, you learn within the first few minutes of the play that Maxine and Margot were once lovers. So I'm not giving too much away. It's not one of those shocking, curtain act sudden revelations. So it's only a slight spoiler. But, in the original, Max is a writer of television mysteries, and he talks a little bit about it. But I thought, well, let's really expand that to the point where at a certain point you hear Maxine on the radio talking about different mystery forms while you're watching the murder take place. And I just think that's a lot of fun. The audience gets to file certain things away and then see it enacted, and little electrodes pop up in your brain as those things happen.
Which is actually those electrodes popping is something I've noticed, and I'm sure for some of you who have seen it, I've watched the audience after I saw the play, open at our theater. I not only watched the actors, but now I watch the audience react verbally and loudly at times to revelations, and like you said, those electrodes popping, because as the pieces start to fall into place, or when the characters start to kind of play chess with each other, I think there's something really delightful about the audience having vocal reactions to that. And also the fact that I'd like to talk about the fact that you put some humor into this, that in our talk back last week, a couple of people brought up the fact that one of the things that surprised them, not in a bad way, but in a way that they didn't expect from the original, was that you actually allow humor to be incorporated in the storytelling. In the original, it's pretty intense and pretty suspenseful, not a lot of humor, but you make room for that without losing, I think, the tension. Can you talk a little bit about that and your decision to let the audience have those different experiences?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think it's hard for me to avoid some levels of humor. And also, a character says something funny or witty, and immediately the audience connects with that character. It's a way of binding the audience to the character on stage. Also, we know it's a way of diffusing tension if it's the right moment for it. You said earlier that Lesgate has a little bit more to do in this version. He's terribly important in the original, but he doesn't have any dialogue in the second scene. And in this version, of course, he has a little tete-a-tete with Margot, and at least two of the things he says, if everything's working properly, tend to get laughs. And you'd think, well, you don't really want laughs in this section, but I disagree. I think an audience can switch gears as long as the acting is switching gears too. As long as the director and the actors are all keeping it within a certain framework. You never want to get too broad, obviously. And as long as it's true to the character. So I think that's perfectly fine. And also, if you can put a laugh around a plot point, somehow that makes the audience remember the plot point more than if it's simply there as dry information. So some of it is quite strategic that way.
I never thought of that before. I'll have to think about that. That marrying a plot point that's important for people to remember, along with some humor, actually makes it stick a little deeper.
Yeah, and as much as I like laughter, I mean, laughter is mother's milk to most playwrights. I'm in these plays, I really love the gasps and the little whispers the audience makes when they say things like, "Oh, I know that was going to happen," or I guess what I would call the Ethel Mertz "uh-oh," where something is happening, the audience goes, "uh-oh, uh-oh," and I think sometimes that's even better than a laugh.
Yeah. My wife was sitting next to someone who kept saying over and over in the second act, "Oh, he's gonna get it. Oh, he's just gonna get it," like pretty loudly. And and that was great for everyone around. Then no one felt like that was distracting. People around them looked at him and nodded like, mm-hmm. So it was a nice little
Well,
anti-tone.
with a stage thriller, you want a lot of surprises and you want suspense. You don't want the audience to get a half an hour ahead of you or 40 minutes ahead of you. But if they're 10 minutes or 8 minutes ahead of you in their suspicions, and then their suspicions are rewarded, aha, I was right. I think that's fine. That's great. They clap themselves on the back, and so in moments like that, we kind of become co-conspirators.
Mm. Oh, I love that. The Well, I want to open this up to the audience. I have, of course, more questions, but anyone would like to jump in with a question or a comment from seeing it? Yes.
In relation to your
One second, if we could have the yeah.
in your last response, do you find when you're dealing with something that is so comparatively well known, do you find it more difficult to put in things that
He's having trouble hearing.
You'll have to repeat it for me, Brent.
In regard to your last response, when you're dealing with a play that is so well known, primarily from film rather than from the original stage play, do you find it more difficult to put in, create sort of the aha moments that you were talking about in an adaptation when people already are pretty familiar with the concept?
So the question being, if people know the original film or the play, is it harder to put in the aha moments and things like that? Well, as I would say, I wouldn't want to screw around with anything that not did well, and it does 1,000 things well. But I think there are a couple of small moments here and there where a character says or does something that isn't in the original, and it is a plot changer. It changes the way characters behave or think about each other. So if you know the play or the film well, I think it's kind of fun to be going along with the flow, and then suddenly the flow takes you into a different tributary. So I don't know if that makes for hard work, but if you read the original play and immediately you got a few ideas about changes here and additions there that you think the audience will have fun with, then you go with it. But I would never want to upend the entire thing called Dial M for Murder because it's already very, very good.
Hmm.
Thank you. I thought the curtain opening was just amazing. And it was like, okay, this is usually what you run into halfway into a play. And if this is what's happening now, this is gonna be a ride. Just a comment.
So just to expand on that, do you feel like what I'm hearing you say is at the top of the show, when we were dropped into the middle of the conversation with Matt, and the first line is, "How would you murder me?" we're just already having to kind of, play catch up. That could normally be the end of a scene or a big penny drop, but instead it's different.
Well, that and the,
Mm,
I mean, yeah, usually that happens in the middle.
yes.
And it was like, okay, this is gonna be a ride.
Was that something, Jeffrey,
Yes.
do you want to speak to that? Yeah.
Yes, I think it's akin to speaking verse, say, in Shakespeare. Sometimes your ear has to quickly reacquaint itself or acquaint itself with what's happening on stage, what you're hearing. And yes, you can do what I would call the slow immersion version, where it's, would you like a drink? Yes. Ice? Lemon? Certainly. Great, wonderful. That dress is nice. You can do that and give the audience time to sink in, and there's nothing wrong with it. But if you start the play, you drop the play right on the freeway, and you have to immediately start going, I think it kind of wakes up the audience and makes them go, oh, I'm really here. I got to pay attention. And this is one of the funny things about the theater. Everything about the theater is unintentionally designed to make you fall asleep. You've probably just come from dinner. It may be hot outside, and now you get into a cool, dark place, and we turn the lights out. Everything about it says go to sleep. And so you really got to grab the audience, by the neck as quickly as possible and say, no, 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 come with me. So my method is usually let's go. If you have to catch up for a moment, you'll be fine. Hitchcock used to talk about the fact that in certain films back in the old days, and plays too, you often had to restate what the plot was somewhere about 10 minutes in because people came late. And so you had to find some crafty way to tell these people what they were watching in case they missed anything terribly important in the very first minutes. So if you missed the first 2 minutes of This Dial M for Murder, you'd miss some thematic things, you'd miss some character back and forth, but you wouldn't miss the plot. I'm simply saying, perk up, lean forward, pay attention. We're going to have fun.
Yeah. I love that.
You mentioned early on that your adaptation was taking what originally was a 3-act play, turning it into 2. Did that have a great deal of impact on where you could put your aha moments, how soon you could bring things in, and your timing in general?
I missed the last part. I heard about 3 acts being turned into 2 acts, but I missed the last few words.
How did that impact your timing, your aha moments, your revelations?
Sure. We have the same number of scenes as the original. In the old days, if you've seen the show, there would have been an intermission after Tony and Lesgate planned the murder. That would have been about a half hour into the show. And in those days, your first act was short, 30, 35 minutes, then you'd have an intermission. And then in those days, the scene before the murder, the scene of the murder, and the scene where the inspector comes would all be played as the second act. That would be about an hour long. Then there'd be another intermission, and you come back for a 20-minute third act. So all we really did was to put the intermission at the end of the murder scene, and it's already got a good curtain line. When the police are about to come in the doors, and so I have Tony say something like, "Did the murderer say anything?" And Margot lies and says, "No." Curtain. So without altering the structure, it was very easy to put that in, and it didn't really affect any of those extra ahas. So structurally, the only thing we did was put a meat cleaver down between 2 scenes. We didn't cut a scene in half.
Mm. But because of that, I find it interesting, Jeff, that you have these 2 characters of Lesgate and the inspector, and each of them only appear in one of your 2 acts. So we have Lesgate, who dominates a lot of the first act,
and I shouldn't tell a producer, an artistic director this, but there have been productions where they've had that played by the same guy. It's not something that I would advise, but occasionally they've been strapped for cash and they want to do it economically. And so Lesgate is played by one guy who then comes back as the inspector. But it's a little tricky, not because audiences aren't accustomed to people being double cast, but in a thriller, the audience might think, oh, is Lesgate not dead and he's come back disguised as an inspector? An audience starts thinking along those lines. So you may save some money doing it that way, but you do risk the audience, thinking it's a different kind of play than it really is.
Well, speaking of different kinds of plays, something that Laura Kepley, our director, took pains to talk to the cast about, and that I've shared with our audiences as well, is the difference between a thriller and a mystery. And the idea of, with Dial M, that we know pretty early on who is the protagonist, who is the antagonist, and when it comes to our sociopath, will he get away with it? And it's interesting in this moment. I have to share that I'm a huge fan of I don't know if you've watched it, Jeff, the TV show Poker Face. That's on Peacock with Natasha Lyonne. That's a direct homage to Columbo and Peter Falk,
Yes.
and very much that vein, right? Of like, we know what it happened, and now we're going to watch what will this person or people get away with it, which I just think is interesting that it's in the it's a little bit in the air, and it feels like audiences are enjoying watching Dial M, going, okay, we don't. It's not about who did it; it's about justice, and will it be served?
Yes, in the terminology, it's called an inverted mystery. And most people think that the person who invented it was R. Austin Freeman around the turn of the century. I think Dial for Murder is the most famous version of it, certainly the most famous stage thriller. And yes, the Columbus, I wrote a Columbo that Patrick McGoohan played the murderer in the 90s. And I love the form of the inverted mystery because it's almost like kabuki. It's very specific. The murder is in the first 10 to 15 minutes, 28 tops, and then the detective comes in and there are certain exchanges, and then you have to have the gotcha or the pop at the end. And, in Dial M, it's all about, a certain domestic utility that's used. Yeah, Poker Face does that. And yeah, audiences really like, I know it sounds bad, but it's not, familiarity. But the important thing about familiarity is trying to ring the changes within the familiarity. The audience says to itself, it's like a regular murder mystery. 8 minutes in, and then somebody's killed in the library, and then in comes Jessica Fletcher, and the audience isn't saying, gee, I wish they'd start with Jessica Fletcher having lunch somewhere, or the audience really likes the comfort food of a familiar structure, but they want you to give them new foods in every plate, every part of the meal. So I've always thought that it's a wonderful form because it really tests the writer's mettle in terms of first constructing a perfect murder and then finding mistakes that the killer can make that aren't so stupid that make him a stupid killer, but just make him a person making mistakes. Or, in some cases, the detective finds a way to trap the killer at the end so that he's revealed making that mistake. So, yeah, it's also that show Elsbeth does that. And I just wrote another one, play called The Butler Did It, about a murder at a butler school. And it's an inverted mystery. So, yeah, I think audiences just dig that form.
I have a question for you, Jeff, from actually one of our core company apprentices. Their name's Abby, and they love your play, and they're currently working. They can't be here right now because they are preparing backstage crew for the show that's going to happen in about half an hour. So they asked / pleaded with me to share this with you. So here we go. this is their words. I was very touched by the way Max and Margot are portrayed as being deeply, deeply in love with one another through all the horrors of the play, and also that you do not shy away from the bigotry of the period. How did you think of their romance differently once you made the decision for Max to be a woman? Do you feel the play is in some way a love story?
Oh, yes, very much so. We've often said, because, in a sense, Tony is the protagonist because he's the one who does things. So classic dramaturgy is the person who does things is the protagonist. And so you tend to invest in him. In fact, I would say that when Tony doesn't get what he wants, the audience is kind of rooting for him to be clever about it, which is odd because it puts the audience on the side of the murderer. But Hitchcock did that, all the time. And so he was often playing with our sympathies, audience sympathies. In this case, though, I think because the love affair has to be so understated, nobody ever says, I love you in the show. Even at a very high moment of tension, when the words I love you would be terribly important to say, they aren't said because of the stifling cultural oppression or repression. In one sense, it's like any love affair that can't be mentioned, but in this case, it's literally dynamite. It makes it easier to convict Margot of murder. It makes it easier to doubt people's evidence and testimony. Why? Oh, because you're a degenerate. You're one of those people. So it's as if you've already got the weight against you. And I will tell you this: that I was very pleased about this. The Frederick Knott estate is still alive because Knott only died about 20 some years ago. So they have to approve an adaptation, and Tony Knott, he named his son after the murderer in the play, or vice versa. I'm not sure how old Tony is. But at any rate, Tony Knott read it, and he was very pleased with it. And he said, this is a spoiler, he said, at the end, with Margot and Maxine, he got tears in his eyes. And it's not that Margot and Max don't get together at the end of the original, they do, but it seems like such a war and such a journey for these two women, what they've had to go through to get back to each other at the end of the play. It's a much bigger struggle, even though it's still taking place in this small sitting room in Mayfair. So yeah, that made me feel great. For whatever reason, that seemed something we were able to lock in. And of course, audiences bring their own experiences of these things. They say, well, that's me, or that's my sister, or my cousin, or my aunt, and so you don't have to explain things that the audience already knows.
Mm-hmm. That's lovely.
Really quickly, I just wanted to say, there's a moment in Act 2 where Tony sort of foils this plan that's been, sort of thwarted against him. And reading it in the script, is totally different. We were at our company run and I watched it happen on stage and let out like an audible, and the director was sitting right behind me and she went, yes, like that's how I know it's gonna work. And so I guess my question for you is, how important is it for you as a playwright to experience the read version or performed version of your script before you can say, yes, it works?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask that to be repeated by Brendan because the distortion made it sound like you were a droid or a Star Trooper from Star Wars.
I'll see if I can get.
It was very,
I will.
Very warped on my side. So, Brendan, could you repeat?
Absolutely. From what I was gathering, that the comment and the question was that the difference between reading it on the page versus seeing it on its feet. In the script, there's a moment in Act 2 when Tony foils a plot that they're trying to get him to confess or to put the screws to him, and he manages to foil their plot. And it's one thing on the page for that to happen, but what they were saying was on its feet, when it was run for everyone in the company to watch, they let out an audible gasp when that happened, and the director was sitting behind them, and the director said yes out loud, like, okay, this is going to work because of the and so the question is about that what is that like for you as a playwright? Is it important to experience your scripts on their feet when for you to determine, okay, it's working? Yes.
Yes, and of course you never know until you've got an audience. And sometimes, your first audience is a designer run through or something like that, a company run through. And that moment when Tony reverses what Maxine does, I think he grabbed something. Yeah, I think the very first time I saw it in front of an audience, there was a oh. And of course you're sitting there because you wrote it months before, or in this case, 2 years before. And then you sat through rehearsals and people think it works, but there are 3 weeks of nobody reacting, during tech and everything. And then you get in front of your first preview or the invited dress and finally, oh, and it's like watching a bomb that you planted years ago go off. So no, it's very, very rewarding. So when the director said, yes, I share that yes.
It's a tricky thing, I could imagine, Jeff, because in your world, you spend all this time by yourself writing these scripts, and then they need to now then be handed over to a group of collaborators, and it takes on this whole other three-dimensional life. Is that ever what is that like for you? Because that's different than a novelist or a poet, short story writer, where it's them, they give it to the publisher, and it's out there. For you, there's a whole other stage that you were just talking about.
Well, yeah, and a friend of mine used to say that if you want to know if your play works, see it done by a high school or college audience or a community theater, or actors, rather, high school or college actors or community theater actors, because they might get a lot of things wrong, or they might not have the full force of a professional equity actor, that kind of thing. But if 65% of it is still getting across to the audience, if they go to see The Odd Couple and they laugh at "We're all out of cornflakes, F you. It took me 3 hours to figure out that F you was Felix Unger," then you're okay. I always think it's interesting when you go to a play that you've worked on, you haven't seen it in a while, and you say, well, that moment always works. That's kind of interesting. That line always gets a laugh or a gasp. And then there's a category of things where, some productions you get the laugh and other productions you don't. And some productions you get something special that you didn't intend. And other productions, there's a little bit of a trough there. But it's most interesting when you say, well, these are the parts of the show that always seem to work. And I guess that means those are the things that connect most with the audience. Or have, I suppose in the worst quality, it would be a machine-like quality. But, a murder mystery, a thriller, and a comedy, they are very much like machines. They are intended to have certain kinds of effects. And you certainly know it when you don't achieve it. But yeah, it's fascinating to see a production where you say, well, that was a funnier version of the show than I've seen. And this is a more emotional version of the show. And you can't be around every production, and why would you want to? You want the show to breathe like a wine.
We have time for one more question. Anything else we want to ask of Jeff? Yes.
Just put it close to your mouth. So that last answer that you just gave us makes me wonder, how much of your time do you spend seeing your own plays? And over time, do you see them less and less? So you feel like, all right, I've seen the range of what I'm going to see. And how much time do you spend then on your own writing new plays? What's the balance of how you work?
Yeah, I'm afraid that was R2D2 to me. So could you repeat it, Brenda?
Yes. How much time do you spend seeing productions of your own plays versus time you're spending working on new work? What's that balance?
Oh, I don't see every production by any means. If somebody invites me and I've got the time to do it and it's not, a crazy making period, I'll often come by. But again, I have to be invited. I don't drop in on shows uninvited. I did that once years ago, and it was kind of a bad experience because they changed some things, and I had a friend in the cast, and I thought, oh, I'll surprise her. And then I thought, no, I better not do that because if I go backstage, they'll suddenly be aware that they changed stuff and didn't ask me. So my policy is only go if I'm asked. But I enjoy it. I was just up at the Shaw Festival seeing Wait Until Dark, which I adapted many years ago. And, you have to change a couple of planes and go over the border. And, sometimes it's a little like, wow, that took a long time for an overnighter. But I spend far more time writing than I do traveling around to see the shows. I don't have a profession going to see my shows.
Well, and I should say for everyone, this might be obvious, but I think it's important to note that you're not allowed to change the writing. That is something I've also shared as a T-shirt to students that there's something called intellectual property, and you would need to request any changes that you might want to make. So I took a deep breath in when you said that you dropped in and they were making changes because that was probably not, as you said, a great experience to witness that.
It, it was a gigantic change. And I don't care if people change little things, like, oh, your wonderful blonde hair to your wonderful brunette hair, or take that cigarette and put it down on the bar there. I don't care if you change that to put it on the coffee table. I mean, there are things that the logistics of the stage and casting, I don't care about that stuff. And you don't have to ask me about that. I mean, it's nice when you do, but sometimes it's like, come on, I'm not going to care about that. But this one was where they actually interpolated a scene that didn't exist at all, it was only about 60 seconds, but it's like, you could have called me, and if you really wanted to change something, you could have asked me about it, but I was just shocked. And all I could do was slink out of town and pretend I hadn't been there. I mean, otherwise, the show was actually perfectly fine. And I didn't have a big argument with what they did. It was just that I knew we'd all have red faces if I showed up backstage. And, better not to. I just sit around waiting for the phone to call.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that blew my mind. I would never imagine doing that, but it's a good warning to everyone out there who watches this video. Jeff Hatcher may end up showing up, so don't even try.
Well, one of my favorite stories is at the preface for Christopher Durang's Marriage of Bet and Boo. He said he always thought of these as middle to upper middle class characters, and then he was invited to see a production, I think in Ohio somewhere, but I'm not sure. Maybe it was Illinois or Indiana. And he said, for some reason, the director decided everyone was poor. And so all the characters lived in the equivalent of Ralph Cramden's apartment. And he just couldn't figure out why they decided that everybody in the Marriage of Bet and Boo was quote unquote poor. And it's the kind of thing that you would never think to try to protect yourself against. Like you wouldn't write in the script, these are not poor people. It would never occur to you. It's very funny to think sometimes. I did have this one many years ago. Two friends of mine had done a comedy, a one act, and somebody out of the AFI said, "Oh, can I film that as a filmed, like one act film?" And they went out and they shot it. And when they came back, I said, "How'd it go?" And they said, "Yeah, we found out it wasn't really a comedy."
Oh my gosh. It makes me grateful that there are people, great writers like you out there, and that it's not me. And we leave it to the professionals like you making great plays like Dial M and these adaptations. Jeff, I want to let you get back to Rope in Hartford, which I will make a point of coming to see this fall. Thank you for sharing your wit and wisdom and stories with us today and answering our questions. It's been a real privilege for the Peterborough Players to produce Dial M. The audiences, as I said, are loving it, and I wish you all the best on your future projects.
Thank you very much. I wish I could see the show, but you didn't invite me.
I thought you were, but you're right. That was on me. So I'll know better next time. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. Bye-bye.